I don't believe that singing has to be beautiful, but man, I noticed this morning and tonight both. Just really is beautiful. I love to sing. I'm terrible at it, but y'all are really good. It's really a blessing to me. If you've got a Bible or if you want to grab one in the pew, turn to Psalm 40. I don't have all of the text on the screen. Can y'all hear me? Todd, he can stand three feet back. I got to get 3 inches right here. We won't have all the text on the screen tonight, so if you want to open up to Psalm 40, we're going to read that passage, but I do have some on the screen. Are you familiar with a life verse? I don't know when I first started hearing that language, but hear people talk about they've got a life verse, and they just mean a verse that they particularly cherish. It's really meaningful to them, or it's sort of a guiding principle in their life. It's one that they've marked down and said, this is my verse. A lot of times, you'll hear people say it's like Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. A lot of people take that verse and they say, that's my life verse. And it gets criticized sometimes. People will say, that verse wasn't written to you. And that's true, okay? You got to look at the context and say, that's not to you, but it is for you. And I believe even that Jeremiah verse is reflecting God's heart for all people. And so you can cherish that verse. We may talk about that in some weeks to come. But the idea of a life verse is not to say this is a verse personalized for me, but it's a verse that has come to have really personal meaning to me. That I have a sense of this being for me, and I've treasured it. So I want to do a series on just some common life verses, some of those small verses in scriptures that have really personal meaning to a lot of people. They just resonate with us. And I'm going to begin tonight with one of mine, Psalm 40, verse 17. I would say for me is a life verse. It's one that has great meaning to me and that I cherish. And so I'm not going to do a series on my favorite verses, okay? But I am going to start with one that is just personal to me. So tonight's a little bit more of a personal message to me, calling it Thinking of You. So Psalm 40, if you got your Bible, let's read the text together. To the choir master, a psalm of David. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts toward us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them, yet they are more than can be told. In sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you have given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I have not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame who say to me, aha, aha. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. So Tuesday morning, about 12 years ago, I was pretty anxious. I had a doctor's appointment, not one of those routine ones. It was one because you get those symptoms and you go, well, I guess I got to go to the doctor. I was really anxious about this one. And had it set late in the morning. I had other things I needed to do that morning. I was scheduled to lead a Bible study at Carillon Senior Living with a group of ladies in the afternoon. And I needed to be preparing for that Bible study in the afternoon. But honestly, I was having a hard time focusing because I was anxious. This ladies' Bible study, they had a minister coming and he was teaching through the Psalms, and then he moved away, so they asked me if I would come in and just pick up where he left off, and so I was just following along the Psalms, and that day was Psalm 40. That was the text I was studying, what we just read, was preparing for that day, dealing with this anxiety. And as I was reading through it, it raised this question. Does God think of me? Does he think of me? I remember exactly where I was. I'm reading through it, and I get to verse 5. Look at verse 5 in here. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts toward us. Man, that gave me pause. Your thoughts toward us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of him, yet they are more than can be told. Deeds and thoughts. You've multiplied your actions toward us and your thoughts. Really gave me something to think about there. If you've got an NIV, you might notice it says the things you planned for us instead of thoughts. The range of meaning in there would include plans that one would make, but you can't limit it to plans. It's just thoughts. It's saying God has acted toward us, and He thinks of us. And He thinks of us a lot. Did you see that? He multiplied. There's a multiplication of your deeds and your thoughts toward us. You think about us, and you've done wondrous deeds a lot. So I'm reading through this and thinking, should we take that literally? Should we take it personally? Can I take that personally? The God, you've thought about me a lot. There's this just little thought in my mind sometimes that maybe God's got bigger things to do than be concerned with my stuff. And I think I intellectually would say, yeah, God thinks of me, but somewhere in my heart I wonder, I question, does he? I mean, can we say he literally and personally thinks of me? Does he really think of me? Hebrew poetry uses hyperbole, imagery, figures of speech. The Psalms, you think about Psalm 44, for instance, it says, awake, why are you sleeping, O Lord? Rouse yourself. We know God doesn't sleep. In fact, one of the other Psalms said he doesn't sleep. It's a way of saying, this is what it feels like. God, it feels like you're asleep because it doesn't seem like you're answering. So when you read Hebrew poetry, you got to recognize sometimes it's expressing something you feel. So would this be a hyperbole? Or is it really the God thinks of us? So I'm reading along and I get to this last verse, verse 17, and I encounter it again. As for me, I'm poor and needy. But the Lord takes thought for me, personalized. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. If you've got an NIV or a New American Standard or a New Living Translation, others, they will render this like a prayer. We'll put something like, may the Lord take thought for me, or let the Lord take thought for me. This one says, but the Lord. In Hebrew, there's no conjunction there. Okay, it's just, as for me, I'm poor and needy. The Lord thinks of me. The Lord takes thought for me. And I believe this is not an ask. It's an assertion. It's a confidence. The Lord thinks of me. You don't want to rip it from its context. You want to think about it in its context. So what are we dealing with here? If you look up at the title or the superscript there, it's a Psalm of David. Unlike some Psalms, we don't get any historical setting supplied. But if you were listening as we read through, you can tell he's going through something. He's going through some kind of distressing situation. If you look at the way people categorize the Psalms, this one is categorized as praise and petition because he's praising God for what he has done and he's calling out for help in his current distress. He's in a hard situation and he's calling out to God. So if we just look quickly at the way this is outlined, just to put it in context, verses 1 through 4 are praise for God's past faithfulness. He's saying, God drew me up out of the pit. He set my feet on a rock. He put a new song in my mouth. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. I know the blessings that I have received from God. Verses 5 through 10 are a pledge of continued faithfulness to God. Verse 5 that we've already looked at, it's like a transition there. He's saying, you have multiplied your deeds and your thoughts toward us, so I will proclaim and do your will. It's a pledge of response. Look at how faithful you've been to me. I'm going to be faithful to you. I love verses 6 through 8 there. He's saying, and I know that it's not sacrifices and offerings you want. Essentially, it's the faithfulness of my heart that you want. You want me to be faithful to you, and that's what I pledge to you. That's what I want to give to you, what you really want. Not going through the motions, you want my heart. And then in verse 11, this is where the distress comes in. It's a petition for God's help and deliverance. In verse 12, he says, evils have encompassed me beyond number. The NIV says, troubles without number. I can't count the evils that surround me, the trouble that I'm afflicted with. My iniquities have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They're more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. So he's in this really distressing situation, and he's asking God for help. He's asking God to vindicate the faithful and bring disgrace on the wicked and opponents. Often in the world, it's people are living righteously or trying to live faithfully, and yet injustice comes to them. Other people are living wickedly and however they want, and it seems like everything is great. And he says, I pray that you would bring about justice, that you would do good for those that are trying to be faithful to you, and that you would bring the right kind of justice where people are evildoers. Then verse 17, it stands out. It's a position of confident trust. I've thought about what God has done. I've committed my life to be faithful to him. Even though that's the case, I'm in distress. I'm calling on the one who's been faithful to me in the past. But here's where I stand. As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. The Lord thinks of me. That's where he stands. That's where he ends his prayer. That's his conviction. It's a marvelous truth. It's profoundly comforting. It's not just this psalm. It's all over the scriptures. A couple of mornings ago, I went out before daylight. Clear skies, you could see the stars. Have y'all looked at the stars lately? It's just like always, just beautiful. And I was standing out there, just stopped and just looked up, and just like you, no doubt, these verses came to mind. Psalm 8, verses 3 and 4. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you've set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? You look at the stars and it's supposed to make you recognize we've got a big God. Who am I that he would think of me? And yet that's what the scriptures are telling us. That yes, the God who's big enough to create everything actually does care about you. He truly, literally, personally thinks about you. It's a marvelous truth. So I went to the doctor's office we'll get to that in a second. I went to the doctor's office that Tuesday and didn't get any answers. They said, we're going to do some tests. Y'all been there before? Going to do some tests. And I didn't know what I was going to be facing, but it was a hard year for me. Does not compare with the year that some in this room have had. This is, in hindsight, not that big a deal, but it was a hard year for me to that point in my life. It ended up, I had to have surgery about a year later. Didn't know it at the time that I was going to end up having surgery, but I would. And that following that surgery, there's going to be life adjustments that I'd have to make. We all have things like that. Okay, this was the thing I was facing at that point in my life. So I go into the doctor's office anxious. I leave anxious. And I get in my truck and I check my phone and there's a voicemail. I listen to it. It's the lady from Carolyn. And she said, hey, we're going to have to cancel today. We're not able to, not going to be able to meet, so we'll postpone until next week. And I'm going to be honest, I was relieved. Because I was having a hard time focusing and I wasn't quite where I needed to be on Psalm 40. I still had a lot of questions about it. And so I thought, well, I've got a week to work on it. Went back to the office, had some other work to do. Psalm 40, totally on the back burner, not paying much attention to that. I'll look at that for the next week. That night, I was doing some reading before bed, just trying to get my mind in a good place. Read my Bible, had some prayer time, and there was a devotional book that I was reading through at the time. It was by author Brennan Manning, a little book called Ruthless Trust. And he has this... I put provocative quote because this is the way he writes. He'll put these things in there that I think are supposed to make you go, hold on. I don't know about that. So I'm reading that night just where I had left off, and I get to this quote. If God stopped thinking of me, he would cease to exist. Oh, now I don't know about that. That's uncomfortably overstated. Yeah, if God stopped thinking about me, he would cease to exist. I was really frustrated with that, to be honest. But it got my attention because thinking of me, that's what I had been wrestling with that day. Does God think of me? And then I read this saying, I don't know about that. So I'm pushing back pretty hard on what I'm reading. And then Brennan Manning quotes someone with unquestioned authority. Luke chapter 12, 6 and 7, Jesus says, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And not one of them is forgotten before God? Why? Even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows. Yeah, I'm not in the habit of arguing with Jesus. I'm wrestling with this. Does God think about me? And Jesus is saying, a lot more than you know. A lot more than you know. He thinks about you. Do you notice in the reading in Psalm 40 when we read through it, it said, for evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. I've got more trouble and more sin than I've got hair. We're going to presume for a minute that David had a full head of hair. And he's saying, I got more trouble than I've got hair. And then we hear Jesus say, you have a God who actually knows how many hairs are on your head? He knows your troubles. He thinks about you. He knows your situation. So then I'll go ahead and quote what Manning says next, because he persuaded me, okay? I still don't know about the quote. I'm a little struggling with that, but I get the point. And then Manning says this, God, by definition, is thinking of me. That's Jesus is saying, this is the nature of God, to know the number of hairs on your head. This is who he is. He's the God who numbers hairs. That's his character. He thinks of us. It's who he is. The merchant of mistrust dismisses these words as hyperbole and remains grim, sullen, fearful. Got me, all right? The trusting disciple receives them and has an attack of the happies. That cracks me up. I don't even think happies is a word. so much assurance when you realize that the God who made everything thinks about you. And he cares about you, not just with your he knows your hairs. I mean, isn't that profound? Isn't that incredibly comforting? Whatever you're facing, whatever you're going through, to know God cares for you. That is a truth to cherish. That's one to tuck away in your heart. Say, that's going to be a life verse for me. The Lord thinks of me. I'm going to hang on to that one. About a year later, I had surgery to deal with that issue that I didn't know I was going to have surgery. About a year later, this verse stayed with me through that whole year. I mean, if I could say there was one thing that God was working on in me for that year, it was encouraging me that he does think about me and care for me. And so I had this surgery coming up, and you know how surgery is. They all tell you, oh, this is routine. I do this every day. And you're, well, it's not routine when you're cutting on me. You know, this is not routine for me. I was anxious. You've been in those kind of situations before. I think it's pretty normal to be anxious. Someone's going to cut into you. I'll tell you what I did. I just repeated it over and over again to myself. As for me, I'm poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. As for me, I'm poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. Just carried it with me. Just trusting him. I was sharing this story with a friend of mine named Ethan after that surgery and just talking about that year. And after I told him about it, he said, God spent a year working with you on one verse to get something ingrained in your heart for that one surgery. He said, yeah, that sounds like our God. I spoke with Ethan on Wednesday. He's in Hendersonville, North Carolina now, and the situation is unbelievable there. And I'm talking with him about it, and then sort of sidetracked from actual what they're facing and just talking about what God's been doing in his life. And he said, David, the last 2 years, I feel like God has prepared me. I don't even know what, but I feel like I'm being prepared for what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like our God. He's working on you and preparing you for things down the road that you don't even know you're going to have to face. He thinks about you so much, even what you've got coming down the road that you don't even think about. He knows about and he's thinking about. So I often will pray this with people when they're facing hard things. I'll have something in my prayer that's reflective of this, that God thinks about you. And I want people to know God thinks of you. That's not a nice sentiment. It's not a nice thought. It's a powerful truth that cannot be overstated. God thinks of you. And it is profoundly comforting. Now, I hesitate sharing personal stories like that because sometimes people will hear them and say, wish I had a story like that. Wish I had a story that reassured me that that God knows and God cares. You do. You have a story like that. And I think along the way, God gives us these little places that are just comforting and personal and reassuring to us. But that's not every day that you're having those kinds of things. But you do have a story that's telling you that God thinks of you and cares for you, and it is the message of the cross. In the book of Hebrews, this sermon-like letter, there's this part in Hebrews 10, verses 5 through 7. Hebrew writer says, consequently, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, but a body you've prepared for me. And burnt offerings and sin offerings you have taken no pleasure. You recognize that? That's Psalm 40. And he puts it into the mouth of Jesus. He's saying these are the words of Jesus. This is ultimately about not David's pledge of faithfulness, but the faithfulness of Jesus. That's ultimately what it's about. Then I said, behold, I have come to do your will, O God, as it is written of me in the scroll of the book. Ultimately, it's about Jesus, fulfilled by Jesus. You go down to verse 10. That body that was offered, the body of Jesus Christ, was offered hear this language, once for all. Psalm 40 is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, not as an answer to David, but as the answer of every one of our prayers for you. The ultimate fulfillment of Psalm 40 is fulfilled in Jesus, and that is done for you. The cross is for you. I think I had that on the screen. Jesus went to the cross for you. You knew it, but we got to hear it over and over again. You got to hear it, because sometimes in life you're going, I wish I had a story. Because I don't know. It doesn't feel like God thinks of me and God cares of me. You look at the cross, and it's saying, this is what God did for you. This is how far He goes for you. This is how much He loves you, and this is your assurance that you don't have to fear what's coming. If there's anything on your heart tonight, anything we can pray with you about, we'd love to do that with you. If you have not put your faith in Jesus, you want to be baptized into Christ tonight, we'd love to help you, invite you to the front while we stand and sing.